Hello, welcome back to the YouTube channel of Bethel Evangelical Free Church Hanley. I'm Pastor Gervais Charmley, and in this video we're visiting a very special, very beautiful church, the Church of St Saeran, Llanynys in the Vale of Clwyd. I'm standing in the church porch, and behind me is the church door. 15th century, like much of the surviving structure. It has on it the scars of time and the marks of visitors, people who have carved their names and dates in the distant past. Don't do that today. They may have done that 400 years ago, but you're not allowed to do it today. St Saerans is one of the biggest, most impressive of what are called the Vale of Clwyd double churches. So let's go inside and have a look at this little, well, it's big rather, treasure church. It feels like it's in the middle of nowhere. It is in the middle of nowhere. It's in a tiny little village, Llanynys, and it had this enormous church. St Saeran, we don't know much about him. He seems to have been a local minister, missionary, preacher in about the 6th, 7th centuries, and he's commemorated by this church. He had a base here. He seems to have been related to another one of the local saints, but then all these local saints, in some respects these Celtic saints, all seem to run together sometimes. But this building is not one of those buildings that is easily forgotten. Let's step inside and take a look. As I was saying, St Saerans is a double church, and you can see what that means just from this angle here. You can see there is one church here and another church here, and we are right in the middle, in between the two. It's a simple form of church where you have a big space. Rather than having aisles either side, you just build two churches of roughly equal size. Now, St Saerans is 15th century in its current form. There was a church here in the 12th century. Obviously, there was a church right back in St Saeran's day. But the Welsh the church was burned down in the wars between the Welsh and the English, and was eventually rebuilt of this massive, impressive structure. As we see today, it's 18th century as a restoration because the church was falling down, and as we go round I'll mention some of it, but also we'll look at some of the church's great treasures, particularly the wall painting and the coat of arms of Charles II. And so here we are again at the back of the church, looking straight down the middle. You can see that the chancel end, because there's no structural division, no structural distinction between chancel and nave on either side. The chancel end of the south nave has been boarded off as a little private a little chapel for smaller meetings. It also has a bit of a bat problem at the moment, and we'll come to that. But as we begin our tour of the interior, we start with this chap. This is St Saeran. Here he is in his Celtic monastic garb, with his robe, standing on a fish, you will notice. This was quite an area of rivers and watercourses. And down the middle we don't have a stone arcade, but we have timbers. When we look at the base of the timbers, we find something interesting. They are resting on medieval column bases. This is because in the 18th century the arcade had decayed, and rather than rebuild in stone, they simply shored everything up with scaffolding, took the stone out, and put these wooden pillars in their place. There is one stone pillar here at the back, still there, and you can just about see where it would have. It's a very strange building, really. A medieval roof, very nice medieval roof. You can just see there a little face. The hammer beams may have had things on the end of them, but whatever they were would have been cut off, probably the Reformation. But at the same time, this was painted over. This is St Christopher, the patron saint of travellers. Now, we really know very little about St Christopher. He is martyred in the Decian persecution in about AD 250. But this didn't stop people from making up stories about him, and this is based on the made-up story. The name Christopher simply means one who carries Christ. Now, according to the story, he was a giant. He was a Canaanite. And he wanted to serve, he was a very, very strong man. He wanted to serve the strongest person there was. So he went and he found the local king. And he found the king was afraid of the devil. And so he thought, well, I'll serve the devil. But then he found the devil was afraid of Christ. And so he said, I'll go and serve Christ. And so he went to a hermit. And here's the hermit. And the hermit said to him, if you want to serve Christ, become a monk. Remember, we're talking about medieval legend here. And he found he couldn't be a monk because he just wasn't cut out to be a monk. I suspect also that the monastic cells would have been a bit small for him. And so the hermit said, well, look, you can do good works by carrying folk across a river because you're a big, big, strong man. And one night, as he was waiting for passengers to ferry, a little boy came to him and asked to be carried across the river. And so he took the boy on his shoulders and carried him across. And as he crossed the river became higher and higher and wilder and wilder. And yet, he was able at last to get to the other side with the little boy's blessing. Because, of course, the little boy was Christ. And so he's called St. Christopher, the Christ carrier. Now, it's all a myth, of course. And the reality is that he was no doubt a man who was dedicated to Christ. But the myth speaks of how the Christian is one who, in a sense, bears Christ. Now, below we have a memorial reconstruction of a tomb that stood here before the Reformation, the tomb of Bishop Ap Richard, 1238 to 1267. And you can see that it's been reconstructed from the fragments that survived, including the bishop himself, his effigy. And there are various bits of carved stone here that relate to various things. Some of them are even Anglo-Saxon, and some, of course, much later. And there's the font. The font has a medieval bowl on a later base. You can see the bowl at some point has been split in two, which has led to it being a little bit, having to be stuck back together again. It's a glorious building. There we have the old oil lamps. The reservoir at the bottom would be filled with oil. There'd be a wick, and in the evenings they'd be lit to light the service. Today they've been converted to electricity, which makes things a lot easier for all kinds of people, including the church wardens. You'll see that the walls, again, we have these box pew benches, and that's what the height of the box pews would have been. And it's been replaced with these more recent pews that still, some of them appear to incorporate parts of the box pews, but they're lower. And what's that we see here? That is the pulpit. And the pulpit is 17th century. Now, you can see there's the oil lamp on the pulpit. Now, it's the 17th century that King James I passes a law that says that every church has to have a pulpit. Queen Elizabeth was not a great fan of preaching. She said, well, ministers don't need to preach every week. And they've got the homilies, these pre-written sermons. They can read them because I know what they say and I know they won't be questionable. But James is brought up in Scotland. He fancies himself a theologian, and he's quite into preaching, and he enjoys preaching, as long as, of course, it was preaching that he agreed with. As we proceed east, we have here the little eagle lectern, so delicate. The presentation plate has been worn away, but you see how beautiful it is. It's such a small little thing. I don't think it was ever intended to be the main lectern here, but it is now. There we are, the pulpit behind. We have here the Glory of God and in memory of David Williams, B.A. priest, vicar of Llanynys, 1898 to 1920. He was called to his rest on April the 10th, 1926. In fact, yes, he's 1898 to 1926, at the age of 79 years. A long and faithful ministry indeed. And from politics, we have Peter Ellis Eiton of T. Isaf, in the county of Denbigh and member for the Flintshire boroughs. He was the eldest son of the late James Iton and of Mary his wife, and grandson of the late David Parry of Rhydykilgoen in this parish, and captain of the Royal Denbighshire local militia. Died 19th of June 1878. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. It's a good thing for a man who was in the militia to be a peacemaker. Now we are looking west, and you see the height of the building, and then lovely medieval roof up there. So we proceed into the chancel. The choir stalls have fronts, although the backs are more modern, probably Victorian. They have fronts that are dated from, in this case, 1713, part there 1721, and over on this side 1610, so that's the year before the authorised version came out. And these nice chairs here, again more old box pew panelling at the back, and here we have fantastic beasts of various kinds. The chandelier is also worth mentioning. It's dated 1749, and it's made of wood, painted grey. I'm not sure it was originally grey or was just faded, and the inscription at the bottom is gilded. You can see it's a little bit come off there, and they've got a great east window. Would originally have been filled with stained glass, but now it's plain. You can just see all the way through. And it was given by the Reverend Mr. Rutter. So here we are back, and again you've got these elegant fluted square pillars, and you have to remember that originally we would have been able to see straight through here, and the whole thing would have been open. Clergy, nice old clergy chair there, not used anymore. You can see why, it's a bit old. And in this aisle we have the South Chapel. Now the South Chapel is currently it's blocked off, and one of the reasons it should be blocked off is it's got bats in it, and bats do make quite a mess. So here we are, east window. This contains various memorials to the Edwards of Cerrig Llwydion, and other members of the families of Cerrig Llwydion Hall, the Richards, the Bateses, Whitelock, Reverend Williams Edwards of Cerrig Llwydion, rector of St George in this county. He was the second son of Bennet Williams, Esquire of Bolwyddelan in the county of Flint, and married Jeanette, eldest daughter of Edward Edwards, Esquire, whose surname he assumed. He departed this life on the 27th of January 1829, aged 55. A sincere Christian, an affectionate husband, a kind friend, a man of just and generous principles, by which all the actions of his life were uniformly guided. To his memory, this tribute of love and gratitude is inscribed by his widow. And again, it's this non-evangelical clergy of the Church of England. That's the most modern bits, the porch. A funeral hatchment, that would be hung up when a member of the family died. You can see at the bottom that rather wonderful, naive winged skull. Now, as we come out into the South Church, we are confronted with something quite spectacular, which is the royal arms of King Charles II. We'll see them better in a minute, but before then we have the harmonium, which comes from Chicago in the United States, which is rather interesting. These things were known as American organs, and in this case it was a genuine American organ. Of course, they're not real organs, but this is the memorial to Charles II, or the Charles II arms, rather. This is dated 1661, which is the year of the Restoration, and mentioning organs, we mention this. We shall see shortly why. As royal arms go, it's very impressive, and of course it commemorates, it will have been commissioned to commemorate the restoration of King Charles after the Commonwealth, the brief period when this country was a republic. And here we have an example of painting that just would not be allowed today. There is no polite way to say it. The supporters of the royal arms are in a disgraceful state of sexual arousal. I'm not going to put a warning on this video. I shall put a warning on this video to do with this, but only in jest, you understand, and just in case someone gets offended. This would not be done today, of course. This would not have been done in the 18th century even. But this is an area where there's a lot of royalist support, so this is basically an up yours to the Puritans in a fairly literal sense. You will notice here you've got the English rose and the Scottish thistle. Charles II is king, and Charles II is strong and manly and virile and has lots and lots of illegitimate children, all of which is true. And yes, it is somewhat shocking, really. But there we are, the lion and the unicorn. They had different standards. The past was very different. The past is another country. They do things differently there. We turn around and look at St. Christopher. And it's funny, some of the people who would be very, very okay with that arms would have been very upset with St. Christopher. The ladder goes up to allow us to service the bells, and again, medieval roof. Lovely medieval roof. Medieval graves, 18th century, 17th century gravestones down here, 1686, 1699. And probably there are people buried under the floor because it's that kind of church, that kind of era. And we have here some of the relics in the church. You see this expanding thing. That's a set of dog tongs. So you held this end and you grabbed the dog with the other and you bunged the dog out of the church. There is a handy diagram of how it works, which you can just about see there. Because in the 18th century the doors would be open and dogs would wander in and out, and if they got into a fight you would remove the dog using that. Here we have the Welsh prayer book and part of a Welsh Bible. No, not a Welsh Bible even. This is I think this is an authorised version. This is a very early edition. Yes. In fact, this is older. Doesn't have the verses. So this would probably be a bishop's Bible or a great Bible. It looks like a bishop's Bible to me, but it's a part of an old Bible, or a very, very old Bible. It's a magnificent church. It's full of these little treasures. It's a building that in some respects is endangered today, but hopefully there's working towards a future to make sure that it remains open, remains in use. Well, let's have a look around the outside, shall we? Here we are outside St. Saerans, and you can see here the impressive scale of the building. The windows on this side are 18th century. They date from the same period that the central arcade was renewed, shall we say. Let's continue to look around the outside. The Vale of Clwyd double church is a recognised form. It's something that's not unique to this part of Wales, but they're found most often here. And it's a very Welsh design, a very Welsh idea to fix two churches together to get you twice the size. Now on this side you can see you've got these 18th century windows with 19th century filling, as it were. Big graveyard. Again, you can just see the curve there of the original Llan, which has been partly subsumed into the vicarage, into the rectory garden. And you can just see there the rectory, which is no longer in ecclesiastical use as a path. The path went straight from the rectory door to the church, of course, so the rector could go to church in the morning. The east end, you can see the double church, a great effect here. We've got this Victorian window on the south side and the original 15th century one on the north. Most impressive. And the hills in the background, and we're here in the Vale of Clwyd, and further up there's other little churches on the edge there, but they're not open at the moment. After COVID, when things get a bit more normal, or more normal than they are, reopening again, you can see here the edge of the Llan, the edge of this enclosure, and the cloud coming down upon the hills. It's very beautiful, and tiny little village, tiny little settlement. And here we are on the north side of the church, and you can see here this medieval window here. The other two have been renewed, but again they have that 15th century form. And the table tombs slumbering here in the graveyard. The white was kind of normal to whitewash these buildings, paint them white to make them stand out. You'd see them for miles across the valley, across the vale. And as we come round, there's the old pub. Like so much of this village, a little decay. You see the top of the old phone box there. That's now a defibrillator. And the west end with its great west door, where processions would have entered in the Middle Ages, and they would have processed through to the church, to the east end. Here by the gate we have the grave of the Reverend Williams B.A., 25 years rector of Llanynys, who departed this life June 25th, 1869, aged 66. So Llanynys is basically, it's the next door parish, next door village. And here we are, it's a very blank West End. There's just one door and that's it. And as we come round, we process around finally to the front door, back where we began. Go past here. And you can see here you've got the remains of a table tomb. Bits there, and here is this rather cheerful little bewigged head. Very 18th century. And there again the clouds descend upon the hills. It's a beautiful day. Well, I'll briefly conclude and make an end to this little video.